Okay, so today we're looking at Prelim Practice Paper 2. So the first question. So I always tell my students this, the most important thing to do is to figure out what is the main topic this question is from. One look at this question, you already know that this is on cells. Okay? So for cells question, right, it is very important to identify cell structures together with function. So you must be able to identify your cellular structures, and then you must know what they are used for. And you need to go and memorize the standard. Okay, so for example, right, let me give you a very quick example of what I mean by non-standard. So non-standard, right, for example, students will always say chloroplast helps to photosynthesize. Now, when it comes to chloroplast, it is not enough to just say that it helps to photosynthesize. You have to tell me that it contains chlorophyll that traps your sunlight, okay, to carry out photosynthesis. That's important, the whole thing. Okay, so as I told you already, when it comes to cell, you must memorize, be able to identify the various cell structure and link it together with its function. So let's do a very quick revision here. So part Y is actually your chloroplast. Okay, now there are two lines here actually. I'm going to have to use a thinner line to show you. The one that I use a dark blue, the outermost is called your cell membrane, cell wall. And then the second inner line, which is in purple, is known as your cell membrane. So they serve two very different purposes, be careful. Okay, your cell wall is concerned with providing a regular shape to your cell, whereas your cell membrane controls types of substances entering and leaving the cell. And then moving on, the space here is your cytoplasm. And these empty spaces here in pink, these are your vacuoles. Now, usually for plant cells, you only see one large central vacuole, whereas down here you have multiple large ones, okay, for plants. And then last but not least, your nucleus is in orange. Now, be very careful. Whenever they ask you about the function of the nucleus, it's not just enough to state controls all cellular activities in the cell. You have to give at least two examples of what are these activities. For example, you would have things like cellular repair. That is one such function. Okay, it can also be in charge of reproduction or cell division. Okay, so you list two. So how would the whole statement go? So your nucleus control all cellular activities such as cellular repair and reproduction. Okay, so let's jump into the question. Identify part Y. So part Y is your chloroplast. Okay, sorry, let me switch to a thicker pen. Okay, part Y is a chloroplast. Okay, it contains green pigment chlorophyll, sorry, I think I make a misspelling here. To trap sunlight for photosynthesis. All right, moving on to the next question. Daniel then took another cell sample T from animal. Now, besides part Y mentioned above, identify one difference and the cell parts listed in your observation of R and T. So for cells, right, there are three components that are that I would say common between your plant and your animal cells. It doesn't matter whether is it plant or animal cells, they are common. Okay, what are they? They are your nucleus, cytoplasm, as well as your cell membrane. Now, even your vacuoles are different. The one in your animal cells, right, are small, tiny, numerous vacuoles, whereas your vacuole in your plant cells, they are very large. Okay, so that's why you can see them clearly. So the main difference between your plant cells and your animal cells in this case would be that your cell wall. Now, it is also very important to note that your cell wall needs to be present in all cells. In all cells. Okay? So remember, the structure of answering, I tell you, is always identification of cellular structures together with their function. Okay? So once again, true enough, they're asking for function. Okay? And they're asking for difference. And this part actually talks about identification. Okay? So how would the answer look like? So cell R has a cell wall, while cell T does not. Okay? Now, then you have to tell me that the cell wall helps cell R to keep a regular shape. Now, students tend to just say shape, to keep a shape or to have a shape. Now, it is not good enough to say just to have a shape. You have to tell me what kind of shape. In this case, I'm looking for the keyword regular. Not any other shape, but a regular shape. All right, moving on. Okay, the diagram below shows two of the stages in life cycle of insect A. So obviously this is a life cycle question. Okay, based on the observation of the diagram above, state one similarity between the nymph and the adult of insect A. So in this case, you have to base on your observation, means that it has to be based on the diagram and nothing else. So what are some of the things? Let's talk and discuss about it. So first up, you see the two pillars here. Okay, so there are two pillars here and two pillars here. And then after that, you have three pairs of legs over here. And some of you could even say three body segments. But it's not that clear for the cockroach unless you turn it around, because the wings will cover it. And in this case, you cannot talk about the wings because the adult has wings as shown, but the nymph don't have. So maybe the three body segments may not be a very good answer because you can't really tell. Okay? So you can say both have 6 legs. That's it. Next. At the nymph stage, its mass increases quickly. That is the key thing. Give a reason why. So you think about it. It's talking about increasing of mass, you know. Is your nymph able to photosynthesize? I don't think so. So the only other way it could have increased in mass when you think about it is if it eats more, right? it can't be any other way around. We cannot say, oh, it photosynthesizes more, or, yeah, it has to eat more in order to grow, okay, to increase in mass. There's no other way around it. Okay, so the answer would be the nymph feeds a lot more during this stage. That's about it. But this is something that students fail to realize somehow. Okay, it's a very easy question, but it's also one that many students cannot get it. So annotation in this case will help you. Ask yourself, why? How does it increase its mass rapidly? Okay? Now this question, okay, Matt observed that when ductwicks were introduced into an opaque tank. Okay, so let's highlight some keywords. So ductwicks, the ductwicks are here at the top. Opaque tank means that light cannot pass through. Okay, as shown below, guppies swam to the surface of the tank. Okay, now explain why guppies swam near the surface of the tank. So before I give you the answer, let's discuss a little bit. Now, if you were to take a look at this question, okay, you realize there's a few things. There are hydrillas, there are guppies, there's opaque tank, and there's ductwick. So ask yourself, what is the point of an opaque tank? An opaque tank basically does not allow light to enter, right? Because it's opaque. So the whole idea is light cannot enter from the sides of the tank. And then after that, why the ductwicks were grown? And then they say only after the ductwicks have introduced, then the guppies start to swim near the surface. So we have to also understand that your ductwick, when it's at the top here, right, what it does is that it blocks the light, okay, from going down to your hydrilla. So technically your hydrilla, they're underwater plants, they're supposed to be able to photosynthesize. Okay, they're supposed to be able to photosynthesize and what? And produce oxygen. Okay, produce oxygen for who? So produce oxygen for your fish, right? But because now light can no longer enter the only possible way, because the sides are all opaque, right? So light can only enter from the top, but because of the ductwick now is being blocked, your photosynthesis can no longer occur. Okay, and then so there'll be no oxygen for your fish, and then your fish will eventually die. Okay, and so therefore your fishes swam to the surface to get air, oxygen, O2, okay, from the surface. Now some students will say that the fish swam to the surface to actually get oxygen because the ductwick, they are photosynthesizing, and so they will release oxygen for your fishes. So since the ductwick is floating at the top, so the fishes will be able to get oxygen from the ductwick. Well, yes and no. Now the answer is no in this case is because, just in case you didn't know, most of the stomata, okay, for water plants that are floating is on the upper side one. Not on the underside. Because if it's on the underside, it will be blocked by water. And then it cannot gain carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So it is not on the underside. So because it's not on the underside, right? So even if the guppy swims up to it, it will not be able to get any oxygen. Okay? So the whole story is basically because your ductwick has blocked the light. Okay? Hence your hydrilla can no longer photosynthesize and produce oxygen. Your guppies need to respire. So what they do, they need oxygen respire, right? So they swim up to the surface to get oxygen. That's the whole story as to why. Okay? So So come, let's craft the answer. So basically, the answer would be number 1. You need to first mention that the dark wick block the light block the light for hydrilla. Hence, the hydrilla rate of photosynthesis decreased. Because of that, less oxygen was produced. Hence, the guppies swam to the surface to get more oxygen. So you need to be very careful about how you craft your answers. Do you realize that I don't say no photosynthesis occurs? Because if you take a close look at the diagram, there are some patches whereby light can still enter. Okay, I also don't say that no oxygen. I said less oxygen is being produced. And I also say that the fishes swim up to the surface to get more oxygen. Because it's not that there is zero oxygen in the water, it's just reduced amount. So to get more, they will swim to the surface. So you need to be careful with how you craft your answers, okay? Next, besides reducing the number of dark wicks and changing the tank, suggest one change that Matt could do to prevent the guppies from swimming near the water surface. Now, some of you actually said things like, oh, put a light source outside the tank. But the tank is opaque. So because the tank is opaque, okay, if the tank is opaque, light will still not be able to enter. Alright, so basically what you can do is you can put a light source in the tank. That's one. Your second option would be to put an oxygen pump or an air pump. Okay, so I'm sure you have all seen before air pumps in tanks. Okay, so the air actually contains oxygen. Alright? Now, interestingly, right, I don't know if you have seen a pond setup before. If you have a pond setup, some of the more nicer ponds, right, they actually have waterfalls at the side, okay, or water fountains. And then after that, the water will fall, or there's a water fountain, okay, coming in the center. So in this kind of setup, you realize that there may not be any oxygen tank or air pump, because as the water falls, it actually helps to dissolve the air, because some of the air will be trapped. That's why you see a lot of bubbles. Okay, when the waterfall hits the water in the pond, okay, you see a lot of bubbles forming. Moving on. Okay, we are skipping this question. Okay, we're looking at this question now. Okay, Ahmad cut two identical stalks A and B from the same plant and placed them in identical conical flasks containing 100 ml of water. For stalk A, he removed the food carrying tubes A. Okay, for B, he removed the water carrying tubes. So it'll be good if, let's just say you've got highlighter, you can actually help to color code so that it's easier for you to see. Okay, of course you shouldn't be wasting too much time, but it's good that you color code. So straight away you know that, okay, B, okay, has no water carrying, and A has food carrying. So let's read on. For a week, he noticed that the leaves on stalk A remain the same, but the leaves on stalk B has wilted. Explain why the condition of the leaves on A and B were different. So look at some of the keywords. So when I looked at it, when I see the word difference, I know that I need to compare and contrast. I need to state why are they different and what were they different. So obviously what's different is that one has food carrying tube removed, the other has water carrying tubes removed. Okay, so then you need to ask yourself, how does this impact the leaves? So in the first one in stalk A, you will notice that because it's just the food carrying tubes that are being removed, your xylem is still present or still functional. So because of that, your plant can still have obtain water, and because water is still present, you're able to photosynthesize. Okay, so when it's able to photosynthesize, you're able to make food for the plant, and therefore your plant, okay, basically will remain more or less the same. However, for stalk B, okay, for B, you have removed the water carrying tubes. So therefore, no water goes to the leaf, right? So when that happens, no photosynthesis. So no photosynthesis means no food for the plant, and eventually the leaves will wilt. Alright? So that is the whole story. Okay? So how would the answer be crafted? So we say that the leaves on stalk A remain the same as they could continue to obtain water via the xylem for photosynthesis. Okay, and then you have to compare and contrast, right? So now you talk about stalk B. So, however, for stalk B, use word like however or while. However, for stalk B, water could not be transported to the leaves as the water carrying tubes or the xylem vessels were removed. Hence, the leaves could not for B could not make food or could not photosynthesize. All right. Moving on, next question. Okay, the diagram below shows tiny openings, okay, called stomata. Now, whenever I see the word stomata, straight off, what comes to my mind is two functions. Okay, the first function is transpiration. Okay, so transpiration is defined as the loss of water vapor through the stomata. Not loss of water, but water vapor. The second function will be gaseous exchange. So I don't know what they're testing me, but when I see stomata, right, straight away I'm thinking of these two. Okay? Alright? If I'm talking about this transpiration, right? Okay? So it's basically a loss of water. It's got to do with wilting, it's got to do with loss of mass in your plants. If we're talking about gaseous exchange, right, it's got to do with more on, if you ask me, like photosynthesis, okay, because why plants needs to take in more carbon dioxide on a sunny day for increased rate of photosynthesis. So all this should come to my mind, okay, on the leaf as shown under a microscope. Okay, Cindy noticed that when the plant was placed under strong light, the size of stomata on the leaf increases. So why does it increase? Let's do a bit of annotation. So over here, right, under strong light, right, okay, so under strong light signifies that there should be high amount of photosynthesis. Now we mustn't forget that photosynthesis doesn't just need strong sunlight, it also needs lots of carbon dioxide. And this is the reason why, okay, so this increases, okay, to take in more carbon dioxide for more photosynthesis. Now be careful, in exams you are not allowed to use chemical formula like me, CO2, not allowed. I'm just writing down like this to save space. Now, why is the change in the stomata when placed under strong sunlight useful for the plant photosynthesis? I already told you already, to take in okay. Oh wait, hold on. Sorry, I will change this answer. Okay. Okay, stomata opens bigger to take in more carbon dioxide for increased rate of photosynthesis. Now be very careful. Some students would say things like, it open bigger for more gaseous exchange. But the fact here is that I don't really want oxygen, you know. I want carbon dioxide. So gaseous exchange could also mean the other way around. I take in oxygen and I give out carbon dioxide. So you're not being clear here. Because at night, your plant doesn't undergo photosynthesis. So it will not take in carbon dioxide. It will actually take in oxygen. What is one disadvantage, okay, of the plant when the stomata remain open for a long period on a very hot day? So very hot day signifies that high temperature of the surrounding. So remember, in your plants, right, you always hear things like, oh, the plant is wilting, you must water it more. So you can draw on all this prior experience to help you answer this, right? So when there's high temperature of the surrounding, it actually increases rate of evaporation. And when you think about it, I told you already, it's the loss of water vapor. How do you even get water vapor in the first place, right? Through evaporation. So what happens is that when you have a high rate of evaporation, it also means that there's more water vapor being lost. Okay, so how would your answer look like? Okay, so before I craft the answer, I also want to point out to you that so this stomata that is opening bigger to take in carbon dioxide is a double-edged sword, meaning that at one point, yes, it's advantageous. You get carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, but you also lose more water. Okay, so more water vapor will be lost through the stomata at a higher rate. Okay? Alright, moving on to the next question. Okay, the diagram below shows fruit K that was cut into half with small and hard seeds surrounded by juicy flesh. The fruit developed from a flower after fertilization. State the parts of the flower that was developed into the fruit and the seed after fertilization. So this one, right, is got to do with plant repro, this topic, okay? Now for plant reproduction, there is a few aspects to it. But when it comes to the structures, right, you have to memorize, okay? You have to memorize the different parts together with its function. Okay? Now, so basically, right, when you look at the flowers, you have to talk about the various parts of it, and then you have to talk about the function also. This one, memory work one, I cannot save you. So basically, right, parts of the flower before fertilization, your fruit, the fleshy parts of it, right, actually comes from your ovary. Okay? Whereas your seed actually is formed by your ovule or your ovules. Okay, so basically what you need to understand from this, I want to point out is, you realize that there are some fruits with only one seed. So for example, like your mango, it's only one seed. So in that case, it will be only one ovule. But in other type of fruits, for example, like your tomato or your kiwi, you see many seeds. So those kind of fruits, they have many ovules. So therefore, in it, they form many seeds in the fruit. Now, based on the diagram above, state the dispersal method of fruit K. So the dispersal method in this case will be animal dispersal. Now, why? So some of you actually said things like, the flower attracted the animals, or the animal can eat the fruit, okay? Or you know, somewhere along the lines whereby the flower is bright and pretty. Okay, these are wrong. Those are for pollinators. I just wanted to be sure. Okay, so what you can say is that the juicy fruit or edible fruit is consumed by the animals. Okay, so this will attract the animals, right, in a way. Okay, so this make it attractive. Now explain how does having small and hard seeds help in the dispersal of fruit K. So for small seeds, okay, this is a very common question we talked about, so that it can be easily swallowed. Okay, it can be easily swallowed, that's about it. Okay, now your hard seed, okay, prevents the seed from being digested. By the body. So that you're able to pass it out, okay, as waste. So as the animal walks around, it will then be able to pass out. Okay? Next. The diagram below shows organ X, which is found in the respiratory system of a fish. So organ X, so first thing, what must you do? You need to identify. So this case is the gills. Okay? So basically, they are asking you, explain why organ X consists of many fine branches which are exposed to the water. So fine branches in this case, right, when you think about it, that's quite similar to actually the fine capillaries that are surrounding your air sacs in the human system. So the main idea is you want to increase the exposed surface area, okay, to take in more dissolved oxygen from the water. Okay, so it is to increase exposed surface area, okay, to the water if you want to take in more dissolved oxygen from the water. Okay, that is something that we need to be very clear about. Okay. Next. Manjit recorded the number of times the gill cover of a fish flaps every minute and recorded his results in the graph below. So when you've got two graphs, you need to be careful and ask what is your change and what is your measured variable. So usually the change variable is at the horizontal line. This is also known as your independent variable. Okay? So in this case, as you can see, as your temperature increases, the volume of dissolved oxygen actually decreases as well. So it goes down. Okay? So volume of oxygen, dissolved oxygen decreases with increasing temperature. Okay? So you can write something to help you make sense. So this will actually help you make sense of what is happening. And then the other side, this is actually number of times the gills cover flap per minute as compared to the temperature. So for this one will be as temperature increases, the number of times the gill cover flap increases as well. So what's the common denominator here with the two statements? You will notice that the common denominator is actually temperature, right? Increasing temperature. So you can see, and then you must be able to relate this part to this part now. So you think about it, both of them is temperature increase. What happens? So you will notice that because with increasing temperature, there is a lower volume of decreased oxygen in the water. So because of that, your fish will need to flap the gills, okay, more number of times in order to get more oxygen or the same amount. Because now dissolved oxygen is lesser amount per unit volume in the water because of increasing temperature. Alright, so let's craft our answer. So as there is less dissolved oxygen in the water, when the temperature is increasing, okay, the number of flaps increases as the fish needs to take in more dissolved oxygen from the water. Okay, so you need to be able to relate these two graphs, and how to do it is like exactly what I showed you. You write down a relationship, the relationship of the graph for the two graphs, and then you try to find a common denominator. So in this case, it's increasing temperature. Okay, so because of increasing temperature, less oxygen is being dissolved, and that's why your fish needed to so-called flap its gills, cover more number of times to take in more oxygen, because now there is less dissolved oxygen per unit volume of water when the temperature increases. Okay. All right, very quickly, this is a very simple question. Okay, Amy wanted to find out how the temperature of digestive juices, okay, affects the rate of digestion. Okay, she placed 3 identical biscuits into 3 beakers containing liquid Z. Okay, a digestive juice as shown in the setup. So as usual, we should always identify our change variable and our measured variable. So in this case, our change variable is actually the temperature, and our measured variable is mass of biscuits, okay, before and after the experiment. Okay, so obviously the smaller the biscuit is after 10 minutes, the faster the rate of digestion, right? Because the main idea of digestion is to break down food into smaller pieces. Okay, so this is a relationship question, so I'm sure most of you are familiar. Okay, the format of it is as something increases, something increases or decreases. All right, relationship question can also be no effect, but this case is pretty straightforward. So what I will do to annotate, right, is I will actually draw. Okay, so in this case, can you see that it's actually increasing? So I'll put here increasing. So as temperature increases, okay, I also see that, okay, my mass of biscuits decreases. So what does this translate to? This translates to higher rate of digestion. Now you cannot tell me that, oh, mass of biscuit becomes smaller, as you cannot say things like, oh, as temperature increases, mass of biscuit becomes smaller. No, because what did the question ask for? The question asked for rate of digestion. So be very careful. Okay, so as the temperature of Z increases, the rate of digestion of biscuits increases. Okay, so be careful. So that's why annotation is very important. It helps to clarify your mind and to write down points that you can use in the crafting of your answers. Okay, now next question. Organism S depend on the environment around it to control its body temperature. To increase its body's temperature, it often lies up in sunny areas. Okay, based on the above finding, why does organism S stay away from the sun when it has little food to eat? So the key idea is, if there's little food to eat, means you want to have a lower rate of digestion, right? If not, you'll be probably you're wasting resources to digest nothingness, and sometimes too much gastric juices could actually cause gastric for the lizard. I guess I think lizard will suffer of gastric anomaly. Okay, so the whole idea is stays away from the sun to slow down, okay, to drop in temperature, right? So when you think about it and you relate it to this part, you know that at lower temperatures, at 20, rate of digestion is actually slower. Okay, so the whole point of it was to slow down its digestion. Okay, so basically, organism S stays away from the sun to lower its body temperature in order to reduce the rate of digestion. Okay, because there is not much food, so you want to be able to reduce the rate of digestion, okay, because of little food. Alright, for this question, okay, Mark designed the following circuit for a car park entry barrier that he wanted to install at his home. The proposed car park entry system, as shown in the diagram below, will lift upwards when the car stops on the metal plate. So first thing, we have to identify important things. So this is your metal plate. Okay, so when your metal plate something goes on your metal plate, this barrier will be lifted upwards. So let's see what happens. Now, the question asks, explain why the barrier moves upwards when the car stops on the metal plate. So when you think about it, when you have a car that is resting on your metal plate, okay, a certain amount of mass is actually being placed on this metal plate. And due to gravity, as you know, gravity acts on the mass, it will actually be pushed downwards. So when it's being pushed downwards, okay, it will actually touch these two springs over here. So when these two springs are being pushed down, let's take a look what happens. So when the spring gets, when the metal plate, so I'm going to use a gray color to represent metal plate, gets pushed down here, you realize that it touches the two springs and a complete circuit is being formed. So if you take a look at your battery, okay, remember electric current always flows from positive side. It will flow this way, okay, in a complete circuit. So because it's actually a closed circuit, your iron bar here would then become an electromagnet. So because it becomes an electromagnet, it will then attract your iron weight. So your iron weight is basically a magnetic material. Now I know I've done this so many times, but you know, these are very, very common things. So magnetic material, always remember coins. Okay, CO stands for cobalt, I stands for iron, N stands for nickel, and S stands for steel. Alright, so when you attract this iron weight down towards this way, it will cause your barrier to tilt upwards. And this is how the whole thing goes. Now, so you know that this question has got to do with a circuit being complete. Whenever that happens, you want to use your CEO, strategy, for answering. So C stands for whether the circuit is closed or open. E stands for whether electric current can flow through. And O stands for the outcome. The outcome needs to change according to the question. So how would I craft the answer for this? So let's jump straight into it. So we know that, okay, when the car stops on the metal plate, now you have to tell me what is the direction of it. Okay, the metal plate will move down. Okay, touching the spring. Okay, then CEO. The circuit becomes a closed circuit and electricity can flow through. Okay, so then what happens once it can flow through? The iron bar becomes an electromagnet which attracts the iron weight. Okay, so where are the key ideas? The key ideas are here. First thing, iron plate moves down. Second point, becomes a closed circuit. Third point, electricity can flow through. And the last one becomes electromagnet, which attracts the iron weight. Okay, so this CEO strategy is something that I thought alright, it is very, very useful whenever you have an electrical circuit question and it asks you to explain. Make sure you use this strategy. Okay, so if I'm going to put it into context, if for CEO, this actually is your C, can flow through is your E, and the outcome is over here, your O. Alright, next question. Mark noticed that the barrier did not lift up when motorcycles, which weigh less than cars, stop on the metal plate. Suggest one change that he could make to the setup in order to ensure that the barrier lifts up even when the lighter vehicle stops on the metal plate. Now, in this question, if you look at it, the whole idea of it is that why didn't the motorcycle work was due to the fact that it was too light. Because with motorcycles, right, as you compare, okay, to the other one, it's too light, not enough mass. So what happens is that the metal plate will not touch your contacts. Okay, so maybe it gets lowered to perhaps this level. Somewhere here. There is still a gap. So how do you close this gap? It doesn't matter if you use a stiffer or a less stiff spring. The fact that it doesn't touch means it doesn't touch. I don't care whether the spring can be compressed easily or is it less stiff, more stiff. Never touch means open circuit. So in this case, there's only one way, which is actually to make the spring longer so that it touch, or you lower the plate. Okay, so that the distance that your motorcyclist needs to push the metal plate down is smaller. Okay, so you can say increase the length of the spring. Okay, so by extending the length of the spring, you have closed the gaps between, or make the gap between the spring and the metal plate smaller. So now the motorcycle, when it's on the metal plate, will have a smaller distance, okay, to move downwards in order to touch the contacts. Okay, so one very important thing that I want to point out for all students would be that more often than not, every time they see the word spring, they will straight away think about it being stiffer or less stiff. No. Or it being compressed more or less. No. Sometimes the spring is just there, okay, to act as a distraction, like in this question. In this question, right, you don't need the ability for the spring to be compressed is not needed at all. It basically acts like a conductor of electricity. That's all. So I could literally replace the spring with something else, like a metal bar or metal contact. It would have still worked. Okay? Next. Now the diagram below shows a sharp toy attached to a plastic base using a pin. Magnets X and Y, okay, these are the two magnets. They float above the plastic base. So what happens over here is that you have two magnets and they are floating. So because they are floating, there must be some force that is acting okay, in opposite directions. So in order for that to happen, you know that these two must be light poles. So that means this here must be north and this must be south. So explain how the toy shop was able to float. Okay, so in this case, the answer is very, very straightforward. Would be that, make sure you mention, okay, very importantly, the light poles of both magnets were facing each other. Hence, they repelled. So what are the key marking points I'm looking for? First things, I must see light poles facing each other. Second thing is the word repel. So I know that the force are actually acting against each other. Then the next question asks, weights were added to the toy shop and the distance between the two magnets were measured. The results were shown in the table. So your toy shop is here. You add some weights. I don't know where you add. You can add here, you can add here. But the whole idea now is, what has changed? The mass of the shark has increased. So because it has increased, you will also realize that your gravitational force or acting on the shark will also have increased, because a greater mass leads to a greater, okay, amount of gravity. So your gravity force is pulling the shark downwards. So at first, it is at this level here. So maybe after you add in the mass, okay, it will go further down, and your new level may be somewhere here. Okay, so your shark lowers a bit. So what happens, okay, from here to here is that your gravity overcame the repulsion force of your magnets. Okay? So you can say that the heavier weight is pushing down or acting down, okay, or okay, pushing down on the repulsion of the magnets, thus decreasing the distance. All right. Okay, moving on. Next, to ensure that passengers in a car are safe during a car crash, car manufacturers conduct crash tests where cars are driven into car crash barriers as shown. So this is a car crash barrier, okay, in the diagram below. Cars A, B, C were driven into the car crash barrier at the same speed, okay, the maximum depth of the depression, so this is the depression over here, okay, for each car was taken and recorded in the table below. So right off the top, this is an experimental question. You need to always identify your change variable and your measured variable. Okay, and then you should also ask yourself, what does it translate to and why are the results like that? Okay, not straight away jump into answering the question, but really try to unpack for yourself what is the point of this experiment and what do the results signify. So as you know, over here is your depression. So ask yourself, why is there a greater depression? So in order to make a greater depression, you need to have greater KE, kinetic energy. So the greater the kinetic energy, the greater, okay, the depression would be. Alright, and that is the reason why. Okay? So you should be able to actually understand that. Okay? So because the greater depression is caused by greater KE, it also means that a greater KE is related to a greater mass. Why? Because if you look at your results, you would see that as your mass increases, your depression also increases. And since you were able to relate that a greater depression is caused by a greater KE, and also that as the mass of car increases, the depression also increases, it must means that a car with a greater mass would result in greater KE, which would then result in greater depression as reflected in your results. So with that in mind, you can then answer the following questions. So based on the findings above, state the relationship between the mass of the car, okay, and the amount of kinetic energy. Now, be very careful. Some of you just happily copy this. So you would say, as the mass of the car increases, the maximum depth of depression also increases. This is wrong because the question is not asking you for maximum depth of depression. You are not answering question. Instead, what you need to do is, you need to be able to relate that a greater KE actually causes the greater depth of depression. So like what I explained, okay, as mass of car increases, KE also increases. So how would the answer look like? Okay, as the mass of the car increases, the amount of kinetic energy the car possesses also increases. So make sure you don't straight away jump to the graph, and just because the heading is like this, you follow the heading for the relationship question. That's not right. Read the question properly. Now, without making any changes to car B, state one change. Okay, no changes. State one change that could be made so that B makes a deeper depression. So remember this, in order for it to make a deeper depression, you would actually need to have a more KE. So ask yourself, in this case, how can you get more KE? So remember that when you are driving, okay, there are other energy conversions, okay, and one of them is actually to heat, all right, and heat is actually a resultant of friction, right? So when there's friction, okay, due to it, heat or even sound energy will be converted as your car is traveling. So you want to reduce friction so that there is actually more KE. All right. So when you talk about reduction in in friction, right? Okay, make sure you talk about where do you apply the lubricant. Okay, so the common thing is to apply lubricant, right? But where do you apply it? Okay, don't just say use a lubricant, but talk about it. Where do you apply? Okay, so apply a lubricant. Okay, I usually will give an example such as oil, okay, onto the wheels, okay, or onto the surface, okay. Of car B. Okay. Next, state the energy conversion when the moving car hit the car crash barrier. So the first thing is the word moving would have been a very strong signal to you that the first energy here must be kinetic. There is nothing else because they did say it's moving already. Then after that, when it crashed into the barrier, okay, the fact that there is movement, right, that it actually changes the shape. There's some movement within it. That is also kinetic. And then you have sound energy, okay, just like when you drop something on the floor, or or when you hear accidents, okay, it's always a loud crash. In your composition, you all like to write things like crash or bang, okay, things like that when two items collide together. So the sound energy, okay, together with heat energy, because when the two surfaces are in contact, okay, it will cause friction, and then as a result of friction, you have heat energy. Okay. Now, usually for this type of question, okay, I must stress. I stress and stress and stress again. If in the exam they ask you to do like state the energy conversion, then they give you a few boxes to fill in. This is to help you answer the next question. That means you must make use of what you have here to answer the next question usually. Let me demonstrate for you. What do I mean? From the above findings, okay, see, above findings is here. Explain why trucks which have a larger mass than cars have a maximum speed limit of 70 kilometers on the expressway, while cars have a speed limit of 90. So first thing first, ask yourself, what is the difference between trucks and cars? So the main idea is that it is a larger mass. So we know that with larger mass, it also means that it probably will have a higher amount of kinetic energy. And higher kinetic energy, right, which means it will translate to a greater depression. So more damage during a car crash, when you think about it in that sense, right? Because since it is able to depress something more with a greater amount of kinetic energy, it also means that the damage that's being caused to the other car or to the cars that are involved in the accident will be greater for the truck. Okay, so how can we do this? So trucks which have a larger mass will have more kinetic energy. Now be very careful, because it is actually this question is a superlative question, which means that the word more needs to be there, because both your car and your moving truck, they will have kinetic energy. Okay, so you must state what's the difference. Than a car. Hence, it will make a greater depression upon impact. Okay, so the impact depends on what you're hitting. It could be a car, it could be a wall, it could be a fence. Alright? Alright, question 38. Rosa saw her mother sharpening a knife using the object M as shown in the diagram below. Her mother placed the knife on object M and moved the knife over object M in a forward and backward motion.
Explain how the above action done by her mother helps to sharpen the metal part of the knife. So a few things to note. The first few things is that you will realize that forward and backward motion. So forward and backward motion, this will actually hint you that the force that is in play here is actually your friction. And friction typically generates heat. Okay? So in the first question, they want to know, how does it help to sharpen? So we have to understand that how a blade works. Okay? This is actually quite an abstract question. You think about it. Why is it that with a thumbtack or a pin, you're able to pierce things easily as compared to something that is not so thin or not so small in terms of surface area? So if you have a thumbtack or a pin, you realize that the tip edge of it, right, is the thinnest, okay, or the smallest, okay, surface area in contact with anything you want to pin. So the reason is, the smaller the surface area in contact, the greater the pressure. Okay, because all the mass or all the weight, if you think about it, of this thing is acting on one small narrow point. So that makes it sharp. So in the same case, when you look at a knife, the thinner the blade is, okay, the sharper the knife would be. Okay, I'm talking about thickness now. So when we look at the thickness of a knife, if you will look at it really at the blades, you realize that the blades, right, towards the edge of the blade, it is actually tapered down to become very thin and sharp. So when you are actually sharpening a knife, what you're actually doing is that you're making sure that this edge remains thin. So sometimes it becomes blunt, right? When it becomes blunt, as you use a knife, what actually happens is that, I imagine it to be, is that the edge will look like this, no longer sharp anymore. So when you use frictional force, okay, you want to erase away this portion. Right? I'm shading it for you, so that it actually becomes sharp again. So think about it. If you want to erase this part off, you need to make sure that it wears and tears off. So that is exactly something that your friction is able to do. So besides producing heat, your friction will also cause wear and tear. Right? So in your answer, you have to include this point. Okay? So how would the answer look like? So the first thing would be friction between blade of knife and object M wears and tears, causes wears and tears to the edge of the blade. Okay? Hence, reducing the thickness of blade, making it sharper. Alright, so key ideas, I'm just going to quickly highlight it here. So obviously we talk about friction because you did identify that it's friction. So but what is it that causes it to be sharpened? Make sure you talk about the wear and tear part. Make sure the word between is there. Now I've mentioned this many times, but still there are nearly a third of the students to half the students not telling me friction between where. Okay, I've emphasized this umpteen times, but yet this error is still very prevalent. It cannot and it must not be reflected in your prelims or your PSLE paper. I want 0. Fundamental mistakes that should not be there. Okay, and then of course, because it reduces the thickness, it makes it sharper, like as explained earlier. Next, Rosa also noticed her mother splashed some water on object M after sharpening the knife for a while. Explain why. So in this question, right, most students got the idea. However, what they don't get is the exact phrasing. And the phrasing of this is really not that difficult. Okay? Why? Now, in the first place, you must tell me, okay, okay, there are two possible answers to this. I want to explain both because I find that both is logical. Okay, depending on how you feel it. Now, the first one is talking about your water as a lubricant, right? So, because you want it to be able to move back and forth, okay, with some amount of ease. Obviously, yes, you want friction, but you see, if it's going to be so difficult until you cannot even put it apart, when you put too much friction at once, you may end up breaking the blade, or it could prove to be very difficult for a lady who is very petite in size, right? Because usually in your at homes is your mom. I'm not being stereotypical. I'm just saying usually it's a lady who might be doing the cooking. Of course, you have the big chefs, which are usually males because they have to handle very big woks and everything else. They need the strength, but I'm just saying that usually that's the case. So you want some water to reduce the friction, so it's easier to actually move back and forth. Okay, so that's the first plausible answer. So for that answer, right, you have to tell me that water acts as a lubricant. Okay, you cannot just straight away, oh, water reduces friction, or water makes it smoother. And once again, same issue. When you have this answer, people tend to go, oh, water reduces friction, full stop. Or water reduces friction on M. Then I'm thinking, yeah, but friction is a contact force. There must be two. Okay? So how would that answer look like? So water acts as a friction. Sorry, as a lubricant. I've said many times the word lubricant has to be there. Okay? Which reduces friction between the knife and object M, right? Now the next answer has got to do with the part about lowering the temperature due to friction. Okay, so once again, I find that it's lacking a lot of very important fundamental details. Like for example, how was the heat produced? Oh, it's produced by friction. Okay, so friction between which two surfaces, right? And then it's good if, let's just say, you can complete your answer by saying things like, don't just use the word cool off. I know, okay, in the exam you'll probably get it right, but it's good to tell me how. Okay, right? So lost heat to the water, correct enough? Okay, so how can you actually craft a very complete answer? So an alternative answer would look something like, okay, so you would say something is heat is generated, okay, through friction or by friction between the knife and object M. Right? So you talk about the heat, half a mark. Then after that, you talk about the water. Okay, the water, okay, or rather you say heat will be lost to the water, hence cooling down the knife. Okay, sorry, heat from the knife and water. And water, my goodness, sorry, and object M. My bad. Okay, will be lost to the water, hence cooling down both. Okay? So a lot of these are very fundamental, but a lot of times the answer is not complete. So as you can see, a 1-mark question, right, sometimes really require you to write quite a bit in order to be very specific. That's why you need to be very clear about your concepts, so that when doing exams, you know what to write straight away. Okay? Yes, you may need time to formulate your answers, but certain key things like, oh, from where to where, heat is lost from where to where, straight away you should be able to pen it down. Or even things like, oh, when I talk about friction, it must be between two contact places. There is no second way around it. Okay, these are things that should come as a second nature to you. Alright, shouldn't take too much time to think. Okay, moving on. Okay, two similar toy parachutes A and B were used to carry out the experiment as shown below. Before the start of the experiment, holes were made in the material of toy parachute B. Okay, each of the spring balancers was secured to the ground by a string. The string is here. Whenever the toy parachutes were lifted off the ground by the wind, the average force measured by the spring balancers were recorded. Okay, as shown in the table below. Explain why the force measured when B is lifted off the ground is always less, okay, than the force measured for A. So we're talking about forces in this case. This should come quite familiar to some. Alright? So when you look at this, you see the word parachute. Okay, you see the word force somewhere. You see the word spring balancers. So this would hint you that this topic is probably testing, this question is probably testing you on the topic of forces, right? So you know in forces, when you see things like parachute together with wind, you know that this is a question that is, the concept they want to test you on is probably, okay, on on air resistance. Okay? On air resistance. So because it's on air resistance, right, you know that it's got to talk about your surface area. Correct? Because the greater the surface area exposed to the wind or to your air, okay, the greater the air resistance. So right off the top, right, I already know already. Parachute toy B, okay, probably has lesser, okay, surface area, which results in lesser, okay, air resistance experience as compared to A, which has more surface area, which results in more air resistance. Okay, now you will also need to understand okay, that this question, right, requires one to look at forces very, very carefully. Okay, and because it is an experimental setup, once again we should look at the change and constant variables or the measured variables. So what happens is that you will notice that the measured variable in this case is the amount of force that's on your spring balance. That is actually your measured variable. And your change variable is the amount of surface area. Okay, determined by whether are there holes or no holes. Okay. So when you look at it, right, you will realize that in A, technically, okay, the amount of force is always higher. Why? Because if you look at it, there is a higher amount of air resistance acting against it as compared to B. And this is actually a superlative question now, so it should be higher, lower. Okay? So in B, because it has got holes, air can pass through it. So this will reduce the amount of air resistance, okay, or friction between the parachute and the air. So if you want to use air resistance, you do not need to use between, the term between, because air resistance is already so-called within that definition of that term. You know that it's actually due to air. Okay? So, because it allows air to go through, it's always lesser. So how do we craft this? So obviously, you would need to talk about surface area. So compare and contrast, right? So this is a compare question. You have to compare. So how would my answer look like? So B has holes, reducing surface area, which allow air to pass through, reducing air resistance. However, A does not have holes, hence it has a greater surface area hence more resistance, more air resistance than B. Okay? Then the next question goes, to reduce the risk of a toy parachute being blown away free by wind, a stronger metal chain was used to replace the string attached to the spring balances. How will this change to the experiment affect the results? So when you think about it, okay, a stronger metal chain versus a string, what is the difference? The difference would be about mass, right? The difference is mass between the string and the metal chain. So when you think about it, if your string is going to be changed to metal now, and there is more mass, so an increase in mass will result in an increase in gravity acting on the chain, right, or on the setup, because since your chain is that also has weight on it. So because of that, how does it affect the results? Okay, some of you go, it will affect the result. It's already affected, it will affect the result, right? But they're asking you how. Okay, so because now that you have additional mass on it, then obviously you are going to need more wind, right? More force is needed to lift it up now. Just like if I ask you to lift a 10 kg box, and then I say, okay, on the 10 kg box, I feel that it's not secure enough. So I'm going to change the box from a cardboard box to a metal case box. So from a cardboard box to a metal case box, maybe there's an additional 3 kg. You're going to need more force to lift it up. So that's the same basic theory. So the average force needed to lift the parachute will increase. Okay? So this is a prediction question. Alright, moving on. Next question, fly swatter. Okay? So fly swatters are swung at the flies to hit them. Okay? So the fly is here. Let's zoom in. Hello fly. Okay, and then you want to smack it. Now, think about it. Your flies are very fast. Right? I hope most of you know that. So basically your fly swatter also need to react very quickly. Okay, that's one thing you know, in order to be effective. Now the pictures below show the two designs of fly swatters. Design K has more holes in it, while design J does not have any holes. So you already did the first question, the prior question, right? So judging based on these, you already know that this is a question that is probably on forces and talking about air resistance. So looking at it, the one with the more holes one will have less surface area, equals to less air resistance. So when there's less air resistance, think about it. What is the whole idea? The whole idea of it is your fly is very fast. So your fly swatter needs to be faster than the fly. Think about it. So how does this actually then connect to what you need to answer? So let's look at the question. So when using the same amount of force, design K is more effective, right? In hitting flies than design J. Explain how is this so? So like I say already, the whole point about it is you need to hit something that is fast. So this has to be faster. So the word faster definitely needs to be there. Okay? So remember, it's a superlative question once again. More effective. We have told you that your answer needs the word more, less than, more than should be somewhere there. Okay, so let's see how we pan out. So the holes in K reduce, right, or has less air resistance. And allows it to move faster. Okay, you cannot say fast, it needs to be faster. Right? Because it's once again the question requires you to give an answer that is superlative. Have to. Okay? So be very careful. Next. Okay, this is a classic question, like I say 1 billion times. Water cycle is coming out. I repeat, water cycle is coming out. Usually it comes out as a form of real life application. Okay, now this is a little bit more different from what a typical water cycle question might be. Where's the trick of this? Okay, the trick is, okay, I'm going to say one more time. Now, you need water vapor, you know, right? Like in a water cycle, there must be water vapor, there must be condensation, there must be evaporation. So you're going to have to identify all these important components. Okay, you're going to ask yourself this question. I know in order to condense, I must first have water vapor. But where am I going to find the water vapor? That is a question that you need to identify. And then after that, in order to do that, let's talk about some questions first. So a hot pizza, okay, was placed in a box as shown. After a few minutes, some water droplets were formed on the inner side of the cover of the box. So right at the top, if there is water droplet, then what must have happened? Condensation must have happened, right? Now, if there's condensation happening, then I first need to have what? Heat loss. Correct? So in order to have heat loss, I must first find a cooler surface. Right? So this talks about the condensation part. This is actually part 2. Why part 2? Because actually before even there's part 2, there is actually part 1. Okay? Because in order for this whole thing to even happen, your water vapor needs to be formed. Then where is your water vapor? Your water vapor comes from where? Okay? So basically you need to answer. Okay? Your water vapor would probably come from evaporation. The process of evaporation, right? But then again, you need to then identify where is the source of your water vapor. Right? Source of water. Because, okay, or water vapor at least. Okay, or source, I would say source of water vapor. So was it from a pool of water? Was it from the pizza? Was it from, I don't know, the air? Okay, you have to figure out, and then you craft your answers, because there are 2 plausible answers. Okay, so the question asks you, how the water vapor droplets form on the inner part of the cover of the box. So there are 2 parts. The first part is about identification of where your water vapor came from. Now, there are 2 plausible answers to this. So you need to be very clear. The first thing, okay, is the pizza itself. When you make a pizza, okay, obviously there is water in the dough. Okay, and there is water in some of your ingredients. So you think about it, you go and cook the pizza already. Okay, the pizza's temperature is going to be very high. So what's going to happen is that, okay, water is just going to evaporate off from your pizza. Okay, because the water inside is warm, so it will evaporate. And then after that, become water vapor. Warm water vapor. Okay, that's your first scenario. Okay, so then you're gonna ask me, then the gain heat how? Okay, the gain heat, because students are always taught that, okay, in order for it to become water vapor, the source of water must first gain heat, like gain heat from the sun and evaporated, right? So in this case, right, it's more like the water in the pizza was already heated up in the oven. Think about it. Okay, so in this case, it's okay to just say the water in the pizza gained heat and evaporated, because the gain heat portion came from the oven. So that part not very clear. So the second source of water vapor that is plausible is actually in the surrounding air itself. Because don't forget, your air is actually a mixture of oxygen, carbon dioxide, helium, and many other, including water vapor that is in the air. So your water vapor in the air could potentially gain heat from your pizza. Because you think about it, when you first put the pizza into the paper cardboard, there is air in the paper cardboard already, okay, which has water vapor, but it's really not that hot. However, it would gain heat from the pizza because the pizza is hot, right? It came out of the oven. So that is another source of your water vapor. So in this case, it's really how you identify. Then the rest is pretty straightforward if you ask me, because then, you know, the warmer water vapor will rise, and then when it rises, it touches the cooler surface, okay, of the box, lost heat to it, and then condensed to become water droplets. Okay, so how would your answer look like? So, in this case, would be, I would say that the water vapor from the air in the box gain heat from the pizza, from the hot pizza, and became warmer. Right? So when it became warmer, it actually, okay, went up. It rises up. Okay, so you say warmer water vapor then touches the cooler inner surface of the box, lost heat to it, and condense to become water droplets. Okay? So in this case, there can be evaporation, there can also be no evaporation, depending on how you answer it. If you want to use evaporation, you will have to talk about how the water inside the pizza itself gains heat and then after that evaporated. Now, then the next one. The next question, they show another pizza placed in a similar box. What is the difference between the two scenarios? I always say when there are two scenarios, especially when diagrams are drawn, there is a reason and you should always compare. Now, the main difference was that there were some holes and this was the so-called change variable. And you realize that there is a measured variable here, even though it's not exactly like an experimental setup. The measured variable is actually the amount of water, water droplets, correct? So they say, give a reason on how the holes help to reduce the amount of water droplets formed. So this is actually the change variable. This is actually the measured variable, my apologies. Okay, so when you think about it, your water droplets actually came from, how do you form them? Condensation. So in order to get condensation, what must you have? You need water vapor. So any steps that either affect condensation itself or the amount of water vapor, okay, this will actually compromise the amount of water droplets. So if I can eliminate water vapor, I have less condensation, and then I will have less amount of water droplets. Either than that, or if I can reduce condensation, I can also reduce the amount of water droplets. So there are two plausible answers, but I will only pen down the most obvious one. When you have holes, your warmer water vapor will be able to escape, right? So if it's able to escape through the holes, there is essentially lesser water vapor. If there's lesser water vapor, there will be lesser condensation, resulting in the reduction of the amount of water droplets fall. It is actually that simple. Another way that is more complicated, if you ask me, but is also factually correct, would be that by having holes, there is actually a decrease in surface area, okay, available for the water vapor to touch and then lose heat too. So with lesser surface area, you have lesser rate of condensation. But if you ask me, what is the main idea is to really allow the water vapor to leave, okay, or to escape. So how would my answer be? The warm water vapor from the box is able to escape from the hole, okay? So less water vapor condenses. Alright, so the idea is to reduce condensation. Okay, next question is a very, very straightforward question. Now the boxes of pizzas are placed in an insulated delivery bag. Okay, insulated delivery bag. So that's why our students always have this misconception that there's such thing as insulators of heat. Don't have. It's only poor conductors of heat. Be very careful. Talking about materials, the word insulator can only be used for electrical conductors. Okay, just to be sure. Okay, so there is a layer of air. So you see the word air here. Okay, that should ring a bell already. Okay, and tells you that somewhere layer of air needs to be written down, right? Poor conductor of heat. Okay, poor conductor of heat. So explain why the boxes of pizzas are able to remain warm in the insulated delivery bag for a longer period of time. So once again, it's a question that requires you to give a superlative answer, longer. Okay? So remain warm means what? Less heat loss. Right? So it's already very clear already. Because there is a layer of air, you think about it, between the material of the box, okay? There's a layer of air. And air is a poor conductor of heat. It will actually prevent heat being lost from the pizza to the outside surrounding. It will slow down the rate of heat loss. And this is the part that a lot of students have issue trying to answer, because what happens is that a lot of students don't understand that it's required, okay, to talk about heat loss from where to where. So I would pen it down as such. Okay, air acts, or air is a poor conductor. Of heat. Hence, rate of heat loss. Be very careful, it's always rate. Rate of heat loss from where? From the pizza to the surrounding is reduced. So what I want to see is really directional. I need to see from where to where. I need to see the air is a poor conductor. So this is a bit of a cause and effect. Alright? Okay, for this question, Mary wanted to find out if the exposed surface area of an object affects the rate of heat loss to the surroundings. She filled two similar beakers, M and N, with 300 ml of water at 100 degrees Celsius. She then surrounded beaker N with 6 other similar beakers, all filled with 300 ml of water at 100 degrees. So, whenever there's a diagram, I will always ask my students to compare. There is no second guess about it. Always compare to know what's the difference. So when you look at this, right, you know that in the first experiment A, there is only 1 beaker. In B, there are 7 beakers altogether. Now, they are all similar actually. The only difference is that in A, I would say that it's got more exposed surface area, right? Because if you take a look at it, okay, for M, in every direction, heat could be lost. Whereas when you look at N, right, because it is surrounded, okay, it's got less exposed surface area. So therefore, your N, the one in the center, should be able to retain its heat. Okay, and rate of heat loss will be slower over here. Okay, these are my first thoughts when I look at this, and then I continue reading. Mary measured the temperature of water in both M and N every 5 minutes and recorded the graph below. So even before looking at a graph, right, I should get a good understanding. So then I can actually align what I understand, okay, to what the graph might show. So I should have a prediction already. So beaker N should lose heat slower because it's got less surface area. That's my guess, okay, less surface area as compared to beaker M, which has more surface area. So because less surface area means rate of heat loss should be less. Whereas for the other side, more surface or exposed surface area means that my rate of heat loss should increase. Right? So let's see if it tallies with my graph. So as you can see, for N, which is over here, indeed, it retained a higher temperature at every point because this is a solid line, right? So when you compare the two, if you take a look at N, which I'm going to highlight in red, and then you look at M, which I highlighted in green, you will see that N is always at a higher temperature at every time point. This is timer. So at every minute, it is always at a higher temperature when I compare it to M. So this means that my thinking is correct. With a lower surface area, rate of heat loss is lesser. That's why N is able to retain at a higher temperature as compared to, okay, beaker M, which is actually at a greater rate of heat loss every single minute, okay, due to the greater exposed surface area. So then I go on to read the question. Based on the data recorded in the graph above, what can Mary conclude about the experiment? So from here, okay, after comparing, right, you know that B has a N has a smaller surface area, exposed area, okay? So the smaller the surface area of exposure, the smaller the rate of heat loss, okay? Or vice versa. The greater the exposed surface area of an object, the higher the rate of heat loss to the surrounding. Okay, so let me just pen it down. Okay, the greater the exposed surface area of an object, the higher the rate of heat loss. Okay? Or heat loss, sorry, heat loss. Okay, so remember, one other thing to note about open-ended question is usually the questions are related, and the first few questions are there to help you answer or form a basis for the later on question within the same question. So then they asked you, okay, a family of lemurs was spotted huddling together on a cold and windy day. Okay, so basically all these things you need to actually know why, okay, and how it is related. So when they're huddling together, right, I would think about it. When they huddle together, this actually looks something like this, right? Huddle together. And so I'm using the answer that, or the thinking that I've crafted for the first part to help me answer the second part. So remember, when the beakers were clustered together, they actually have a lower surface area, exposed surface area. So in this case, so spotted huddling together must be because they wanted, or probably could be because they wanted to also reduce their exposed surface area. So does this make sense? So on a cold windy day, so obviously on a cold windy day, you don't want to be losing body heat to the surrounding at a very fast rate. So yes, it actually makes sense. Okay? So then we go on to read. Based on the above experiment, how does this behavior help the animal to stay warm? So this confirms my thinking once again. So stay warm means reduce rate of heat loss. Right? So because you want to reduce rate of heat loss, okay, you want to reduce the exposed surface area. So we can say that, okay, huddling together reduces the exposed surface of an animal, hence the rate of heat loss from, make sure you tell me from where to where, from the bodies or from the lemurs, okay, to the surrounding is reduced. So many students have forgotten to tell me explicitly from where to where. Okay, so this is a very fundamental issue, and this is why I always tell students that you need to go back and look at what's the fundamental demands when we talk about heat transfer. It's always from where to where. Okay? Very important. Okay, moving on to the next question. Okay. Ramesh had two identical flasks, P and Q, each fitted with a rubber stopper and a funnel containing an equal amount of water. So once again, when you have two diagrams next to each other, the key thing is always to compare. Okay? So the first thing I noticed is that the difference is that in flask Q, there is a gap, but there is no gap in flask P. Okay, then I continue to read on. He observed that water flowed in more quickly into one flask than the other. Which flask, P or Q, will contain more water after a while? Explain your answer. So this is a question that is on matter actually. And the concept that they're testing you is something that's very, very, very common, which is that matter occupies space. So in this case, the matter they're testing you explicitly on will be your air and water. Doesn't matter, okay? You know that they both occupy space. So essentially, right, the whole space in P and Q is being occupied by air. However, the difference is that in Q, you will notice that the air is able to escape. So when air is able to escape through this gap, because we already pointed out that this is the key difference, because air can escape, your water in Q can actually go in at a faster rate to displace the air. Now, this word displacement means to replace something else that was there previously, or to push it out. Okay, so that is the meaning of displace. Now, if you choose not to use the word displace, you have to tell me what was occupying in that space previously. Okay, so I would rather you talk about using the word displace. Okay, but you must tell me displace what lah. Okay, so let's see how your answer will be crafted out. So your answer will look like, okay, Q. Alright, so why? So air in flask Q escape or is able to escape through the gap. Okay, allowing water to enter the flask more quickly to displace the escape air. Okay, because that is what is being displaced. Alright?